The age-old debate of piracy, accessibility, affordability, services has come up once again. It's all thanks to the artist of Dr. Stone, Boichi. Now, whenever Boichi talks about this particular subject, around piracy and affordability of the manga industry, I usually like to take note. That's really about the fact that Boichi started from the bottom and built their way up. Like they struggled in their life. They had to fight up. They're a success story. They're a success story of somebody who had a dream and really pushed and really grinded to the point where they found that success. They finally were able to break in the industry. And it does feel like with a lot of their posts, especially with what happened here recently in December, it feels like they have like a very soft spot in their heart for people that are trying to build up as well. People that are behind him. He's not wanting to lift up that ladder. He wants to make sure that ladder is secure for people coming behind him. So yes, when this post came up and people were quoting it and talking about how he's taking fire on people for not buying manga and all that kind of stuff, I kind of wanted to read it. So let's actually get some context here. I don't want to throw us right into the actual post, and I want to get some context here. For a while now, he's been posting about
the manga industry.
A lot of it has to do with globalization, getting copyright laws and whatnot in place, digitizing manga, all this kind of stuff. And it eventually led to an explanation of why he's posting about this stuff. And that's this post right here. As I have mentioned before, after an incident that occurred around Christmas last year, I withdrew from many things in my life and spent a period in seclusion. I'm assuming, again, right here, he's probably talking about this incident that happened back in December, where, of course, Grok started doing the whole AI altering of images, and they chose to stop posting on X specifically because they didn't want their stuff to be altered. And additionally, a lot of it had to do with the fact that he doesn't like AI and how it's sort of affecting other people. And again, a lot of it has to do with, their friends, people that are trying to get in the industry, artists and whatnot that are going to be possibly losing their jobs. But continuing, I was heartbroken by the suffering that cartoonists and artists endure. However, the warm words of a great senior mangaka and many people encouraged me to stand up again and keep moving forward. At that point, I decided for the next 3 months, I would dedicate myself to one goal. Let's work for the future of comics around the world. During those 3 months, I worked on many different projects and initiatives. Those efforts extended not only across Japan and Korea, but also from Africa to North America. I wanted to give something, however small, to people who love manga. A gift with a simple message written on it. Someone believes in you. Someone believes in your potential. Yeah, I'm not really... I'm assuming that has to do with this particular article or all these posts because there's very little you can do for the industry in just 3 months. There's very little you can actually achieve in that time. The first article in my comics industry series was written on the final day of those 3 months. I couldn't sleep that night, so I simply sat down and wrote. Although the post receives a great deal of support on X, I honestly expected that to be the end of it. But then something surprising happened. The response not only came from readers, but also people in the government, media, and the comics industry itself. Again, that's sort of what the context is here. And again, he's been posting a lot of this stuff. I think one of the more entertaining posts that he made was around the is reading pirated manga illegal, which, yes, technically makes sense. If you're in an area that doesn't, acknowledge copyright systems and stuff like that in certain countries, yeah, you can read all you want and you're never going to break the law. And there's the cases where, yes, if the stuff isn't legally available in your area or at least licensed in your area, what laws you're breaking. And it does get into a lot of that stuff in a lot of his posts, is the idea of trying to get certain countries to, essentially acknowledge copyright laws as well, international copyright laws, as well as the idea of trying to expand availability into those areas. The reason that people are stealing the manga is because they don't have it available to them. And so you have to create the systems. You have to create the publications so that, it's there. But it also gets in the idea that technically with that, it means that the government then gets taxes from it, and thus the government cares to fight piracy, which then gets into the idea that a lot of these piracy sites are going to be shutting down because everybody feels that it's taking away from the government. So the government's finally get involved because, again, now they're taking their money. But anyways, that's the context about this whole situation. So let's get in the actual post itself. I'm not sure exactly how much I'll read into it because he does kind of talk in circles quite a bit, and he's a little bit scattered. But the idea here is really kind of take the context of what he's talking about. Don't assume the worst. I think a lot of people read this stuff and assume malice, but kind of get the sense of here about what he's talking about. He says, now let's talk about perhaps the most difficult issue of all. There are some arguments that say, oh, we would like to buy manga too, but we simply don't have the money. Does it sound like I'm poking a hornet's nest? Does it sound interesting? It may sound provocative, but it's not a hornet's nest. This is a story about compassion. What should we say when someone tells us, we want to support the comics and manga creators too, but unlike people in Japan, we readers don't have money. How can we possibly spend money on manga? The truth is that Steve and I, Steve is the person that does the translation, heard this argument many times in South Korea nearly 30 years ago. And we spent a great deal of that time thinking about it. In this particular field, Steve and I are probably old dinosaurs. Yeah, he's getting up there. He's in his 50s. I mean, depending on how long he lives. I mean, this could be like halfway point. Come on. Back then, people who argued that free access is a right because we're poor were often much more aggressive than they are today. Their attitude was often something like, anyone who tells us we should pay for comics deserves to be attacked forever. And to be honest, many of them acted exactly that way. Still, when someone says, some readers say they would like to support the manga, but feel they cannot afford it because their primary responsibility is to provide for their families. What is important? Yeah. Provide for your families. That's good. Yeah. 100%. Don't sacrifice that. There's a sad misunderstanding hidden beneath those words. A story of people who not fully understand each other's circumstances. Now, this is important. I want to stop here and emphasize there's a lot in this post that tells all perspectives. The important thing here to realize is to listen to what he's saying, but don't take offense to it. Listen until it's over, because he's going to talk about all sides. And if you think something is attacking you personally, it might be because there's a truth in there. But keep in mind that he is sort of taking perspective of all sides. But his main core experience is living in poverty. His core experience is barely being able to get cup noodles. Keep that in mind as we read this. He's not talking about everybody here. Let's begin with something that may sound painful to Japanese readers. Most Japanese readers do not have enough money either. Most Japanese mangakas do not have much money. Most aspiring manga artists do not have much money. On the side that creates manga, and then on the side that buys and enjoys manga, there are countless people surviving on instant cup ramen noodles, cheap gyudon, and determination. Many readers carefully save a small allowance to buy a single tankobon volume. Yeah, I think this is sort of one discussion that I've seen around manga piracy in general, and that's around affordability. Yes, technically, if you go out and you buy a volume of manga, the price tag, MSRP for US, is $12.99. Now, if you look for the same exact volume on, say, Amazon JP, how much is it? It's like $5. That's a huge difference. That is a huge, huge difference. Now, in a lot of cases, there is manga in Japan that is more cheaper, and they purposely, in the United States, they make them thicker, cut. Plus, you also have the fact that, this is a company, this one's particularly 7 Seas, they have to license it. So thus they're having to pay the original creators, the original property owners for a portion of that. So of course it's going to be more expensive. There's no world where it's not going to be more expensive in some way. I think it's a lot of that has to do with, having American workers and American, publishing and whatnot, printing and whatnot. So there's a lot of things that come into play from that point to this point. It has to be more expensive. It's impossible for this to be equal cost unless Japan themselves, they do the work and they choose themselves not to charge more. It has to cost more. But yeah, what they're saying here is that, they're have to get together allowance for a tankobon volume. That's like $5. They're scrounging for $5 to buy it. So that does kind of tell you two sides of it. One, that no matter what, over here in the West, we're paying more. But it also kind of implies that over there, they're struggling enough that they have struggling to get $5. They do it because they want to support creators. They do it because they want manga to continue existing. They do it because if nobody pays, manga cannot continue to be made. The same is true for South Korea. I hope people can understand that. When someone says, well, people in Japan and South Korea can buy because they're rich, it can be painful to hear. But perhaps those of us in Japan and South Korea should also consider something. For some people in the world, a life sustained by instant noodles is already a dream of prosperity. For some people, simply having clean drinking water come from a faucet is a sign of wealth. Yeah, true. That's why I always tell people, no matter how bad you think you have it, somebody has it worse. Some people don't even have faucets. For many people around the world, a monthly income of $1,000 can be life-changing. Some people can support a family with $6.25 per hour. Where is that at? South Korea is a wealthy country. So are countries, United States, France, Luxembourg. In some countries, having clean drinking water from a tap is a luxury. Well, even some relatively wealthy countries do not provide drinkable water. Water comes out of the faucet, but you cannot safely drink it. And there are still many people around the world who do not even have a faucet. When I was a child, eating instant ramen noodles at home was not an everyday meal. It was an occasional luxury. When I was young, there was times where even cup ramen noodles felt like a luxury. And yet, I still bought manga. In fact, many Japanese readers did the same. Manga did not become successful because Japan was rich. Manga grew during the 1950s when Japan was still a very poor country. True. I mean, you can make the argument that it's much cheaper back then, like the cost of itself. But again, people sacrificed things because it was something they wanted to read. It was entertainment. For a lot of people, it was the way of getting away from their struggles was to have some sort of entertainment. And it was a method to do that. It grew because people chose to buy manga because they valued it, because they believed it was worth supporting. And this is the point that I want to make. If you live in a country where clean water comes from a faucet, then in many cases, you can afford to buy manga. You can support your family and still occasionally buy a volume of a series you love. That's a very interesting way of putting that. He's not saying like you have to buy everything. He's just saying like you can buy a volume, which is an interesting note. Coming from talking about, basically being able to have, he talks about it again, unlimited access to everything. And we should think carefully about what it means to read manga through piracy and have unlimited access to comics for free. It usually means the following. You have a smartphone, a computer, or a laptop. You are connected to global internet. You or someone else can afford the cost of connection. And you have enough access to consume an unlimited amount of manga. And when someone posts on social media saying, unlike Japanese people, we're poor, that also means they have time, opportunity, and technology needed to make the post. Yeah, I think this is probably where it's going to start getting to a little bit hitting home for some people. But again, I want people to keep neutral here. Don't let this upset you yet. Because again, I think he's talking about specific people. You have access to all this stuff. You have the means to buy it, but you're not buying it. You're making an excuse. You have one option to you, but you're not willing to give up another option in order to achieve it. That's really the people that he's talking to. He's still acknowledging, he gets more into it later on, he still acknowledges there's some people that just, you legit don't have access to it. You don't have availability. That's not who he's talking about. He's not talking about those people that legit, they don't even sell it in your country. He's talking to people that it's available, but you're not buying it. In many cases, it may suggest that the issue is not absolute poverty. Of course, there are exceptions. There's always exceptions. Some people generally face circumstances far more difficult than most of us can imagine. I do not want to dismiss those realities, but I believe that for many readers, the issue is often more complicated than simply having no money at all. I began my career as a poor mangaka in a country that was still poor. I care deeply about people who struggle financially. I am on their side. In fact, comics and manga themselves have always been on the side of ordinary people. What I'm talking about is your potential. I believe you are capable of buying manga that you love, and I believe that it's important to understand the enormous value that comes from supporting creators directly. When I lived in Korea, where tap water was available, but not something we wasted freely, and where a cup of noodles was an occasional luxury, Korea's GDP per capita was between $2,000 to $5,000. That's crazy. I think United States is like 90, maybe 100,000? It's probably less than that now, but still. Today's countries such as Brazil, Vietnam, Bolivia have levels of income that are comparable to, or in some cases higher than, South Korea during the period of which modern comics industry was rapidly growing. A great many people in these countries can afford to buy manga, and if they do, they can begin building great comics industries of their own. The potential is enormous. And I think that's sort of important. Obviously, again, based on what he's talked about previously in previous posts, he's talked about the idea of globalizing manga. He wants comics and whatnot to be available elsewhere, because that's the argument that he kept getting from people. We don't have access to it. How do we support it when it's not even here? He wants it to be available elsewhere. But he also acknowledged that some places it's still growing. Some places there's like a select few, that are getting published, but not all manga is being published. How does that get published there? Well, somebody supports it. It builds. It gets there. And again, it builds into what he wants, which again is the idea of killing piracy in a sense, because if it grows, more taxes come from it. The government likes that. They start enforcing copyright and whatnot. They get involved with that. And then thus it helps the industry grow even more. So there is a reasoning behind a lot of this stuff. But there's also the aspect that if there's more availability, the costs come down as well. You get greater volume, it's cheaper. Potentially, hopefully. We should not compare ourselves to today's Japan or South Korea. That's a good point. We should compare ourselves to Japan and South Korea when they were still developing countries. when manga was being born, when those countries were still relatively poor. When Dragon Ball was selling tens of millions of copies, South Korea's GDP per capita was only around 5,000. People were not wealthy, but they still bought manga. A favorite manga volume was often considered more valuable than fashionable shoes or many other small luxuries. It was worth sacrificing a few comforts to own. I suspect many Japanese readers in the 1950s felt the same way. Now, this is sort of like a very, again, older mindset. I think there is sort of an element that people in general, and this is sort of like a very deeper subject here that I'm not going to get too deep into, but I think in general people have become very consumer-minded, consuming everything constantly. And there is a mindset that comes with the idea of, you know, every single series, every single story I have to be reading. And that sort of creates a difficulty when it comes to wanting to support all those works. If you're going online and you're pirating thousands of series every month, you're reading a single chapter of so many series that you're keeping up on, you're not buying all those. You would never have the money to buy all those. We have a mindset of consuming all this stuff. And he's from a mindset of like, yeah, back then where you bought one manga, you bought one volume. Oh, the latest Roxy Get series came out. I got to buy that volume. And then get back to work. This is a different mindset. It's a completely different mindset than somebody who's consuming, again, hundreds of series of single volumes. But again, I think that's sort of where we have the difficulty with piracy, right? Because people consume so much. They can't pay for all that. They don't want to. So they create excuses that they can't afford it. Again, not all cases, just like he's talking about not all cases. I hate that it has to be repeated over and over again. This is what buying manga means. If you love manga, a collected manga volume is not something you buy after every other desire has been satisfied. It is something you choose to buy instead of something else, because the people creating manga often live the same way. Many creators sacrifice comforts in order to draw manga. Yeah, I can see that. And that's why a lot of the viewpoints of piracy is so different between Japan and in the West. In Japan, it's a very much so it's a deep-rooted thing of like, you don't pirate because you're stealing from these people. You're stealing from them. Don't look at this. Don't forget about this. I don't care if you don't like Seven Seas or whatever. You're stealing from these people. That's their mindset. When I was a first-year university student, my lunch was often nothing more than inexpensive instant noodles. Not cup ramen noodles. Those were expensive. I spent nearly all my money on manga, drawing reference books, and screen tones. During that year, I produced nearly 200 pages of personal work and 5 one-shot stories prepared for submission. And I eventually made my professional debut with a manga I drew during my first winter break. Some of the screen tones used in that work had been given to me as a birthday present. If you have a smartphone and an internet connection that will allow you to read unlimited manga online, then you could probably afford to buy a manga volume once in a while and keep it on your shelf. Again, he's not really saying that you have to buy everything. Like, it's almost like he's saying, make a start. Just buy one. It's interesting. And that small act can become part of a foundation upon which a national comics industry is built, because creating opportunities is often the best solution. And again, going back here. But in truth, the real problem is not whether people have money to buy manga. The real problem is that many people have no practical way to buy it. And officially licensed foreign editions are often far too expensive for readers around the world. Yeah, 100% agree. Again, he's acknowledging that there's a problem here. He's not saying you have to buy it and you're all just whining. There is an acknowledgement that there is a problem. One big problem is that the accessibility. A lot of countries, this isn't available. Roxy Get Serious, this one right here. This is not available in all countries. There's a lot of countries this specific thing is not available everywhere. But also, again, that price tag. He's acknowledging that over there, yes, like $5 per volume. Over here, it's $13. There's a big difference there. And again, a lot of that has to do with Seven Seas has to pay them. So there's a chunk of it that's just alone to that. But there's also an aspect here where, yeah, some countries would love to buy it for $13. Like, equivalent. There's a lot of countries where that $13 for based on your actual income and house is cheap as hell. Some people, what they take home in a month, like the whole that they would make in a month, would be enough to buy one volume in their country. And they're out an entire month of income. Like, the wealth disparity is huge. I believe that is a genuine problem. And so the story about money continues. Again, a lot of what he's talked about in all these posts is around the idea of
creating a foundation for a lot of these industries to kind of grow in different countries. Acknowledging that in order for things to be illegal in some countries, it has to be licensed, it has to be taxed, it has to be published there. And yes, the industry itself has to grow. So there's sort of a two-part thing here, where he's acknowledging that some places don't have it available, it's too expensive, but that we also have to grow those industries in those locations in order for it to be, again, enforced, to be not pirated in those locations. There's a growth here that he's obviously looking at. But again, I do acknowledge that one of his original posts here was talk about the idea that this was like a 3-month process of him really looking at this stuff. This isn't where he's like a genius at all this stuff and he's going to have all the answers to everything. He's even noticed several times this is not an answer to everybody. He acknowledges that it's not for everybody. He's not blaming everybody. He's not criticizing everybody. He's just saying, if you have the means, which you probably do if you're doing this or this or this, if you have the means, you sacrifice one thing for another thing. That's the mindset of a lot of people, especially in Japan, is I sacrifice this one thing in order to buy this one thing. You can too. So like I said before, he has a very interesting and unique look into piracy and whatnot that I do like to kind of dive into. Hopefully y'all that watch this, again, kept an open mind and really kind of looked at what he was saying here. Some interesting little looks into sort of, again, the perspective of somebody that had to rise up from the bottom and really became a successful story and is presumably looking into what it would take in order to help with a lot of these industries and, again, help availability. But anyways, hope you guys found this video informative. Hope you found it entertaining. If you did, hit the like button down below. Until next time, take care.